Multidisciplinary stakeholders in South Africa are meeting to explore how the state's main infrastructure programs could adapt and also utilize green planning methodologies and technologies. Joining us now about greening infrastructure is Saphira Patel. She is an environmental specialist for the Development Bank of Southern Africa, or DBSA. Saphira, thanks for your time. First and foremost, this whole concept of greening infrastructure, what does it mean?
Well, basically, greening infrastructure relates to providing infrastructure in a more sustainable manner, infrastructure that is able to respond to climatic changes, environmental degradation, environmental issues, basically.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about the materials that are used in the infrastructure program, the way in which these bridges and dams are built. What is being required of stakeholders?
Both. Okay, you'd look at more sustainable, greener infrastructure design. You'd look at greener material use, but you'd also look at your biodiversity, your natural resources, the infrastructure that we get that we don't pay for, like a wetland. So that's also part of your green infrastructure, your biodiversity, and how everything works together.
Okay, so you've partnered with the Department of Environmental Affairs in a series of dialogues and conversations called the Knowledge Week. What is envisaged for this particular interface between industry and the various stakeholders?
Well, basically what we're trying to say is that, the country, we need to develop, we need to provide infrastructure, provide services to the communities. And what we need right now is to do things differently, do things in a much more sustainable manner, a greener manner, and look at how we can do things that aren't going to impact negatively on the communities that we provide for.
I mean, if you looked at, for instance, a key component of the infrastructure program in South Africa is the setting up of power plants, because we've got our electricity needs. And we know that of the first two, Kusile and Mudupe, they're going to be coal-fired power plants. They might look at alternatives going forward. But in the immediate future, we're still going the fossil fuel route. What would you expect from a company like Eskom, for instance, in terms of their approach to greener technologies?
Well, I would expect that they would be busy innovating in the background and coming up with different ways of doing things and providing the country with electricity. There's other methods you can use: hydropower, you can use solar power, wind power. So there are other things, and there is a lot of energy going into that sort of innovation.
If you look at other major construction projects, infrastructure, it's within the mining sector, which we know is sort of the bedrock of our economy. And there's always been a lot of conversation as to what mining companies are doing to empower their communities. Is this an opportunity now for some sort of collaboration between the community in which they operate and how we're starting to build major projects around that particular sector of the economy?
Oh, definitely. I mean, without environment, we're not going to have people. Without our environment, we wouldn't have an environment to mine. So bringing communities and the mining houses together to make sure that once the resources have been depleted, the communities still have something to subsist off is very important. So it's very important that everybody works together.
Are people working together? I mean, we hear about South Africa's commitment to reducing its carbon emissions by over 30% in 10 years' time. We hear about investments being undertaken by a state body like the IDC to supporting greener economies. We see IPAP having as a huge component. We see these things, but how many of us are actually registering?
I think we might not see it up front blaring at you all the time, but it's there. We have all sorts of projects that are taking place at the moment. High-level projects and community-level projects, different projects with private sector, public sector, with farming communities, basically bringing people together to do things differently, to value our ecosystems differently, and to provide services to people. So it's definitely happening.
Okay, at the DBSA level, because we often associate you with high-level corporate financing and huge infrastructure development projects across Southern Africa, what sort of concerted effort is coming out of the DBSA?
Oh, we've got tons. We have Knowledge Week this year, which was based, the topic was greening infrastructure. We have, before we do any investment, the bank has what we call our environmental appraisal guidelines, which we implement. We review each and every project that comes through the bank to make sure it's sustainable, to make sure we reduce environmental risk, to mitigate environmental risk when we can. And to try and get the best out of the project in any way. And that goes to the design, to the materials, to how the project is going to be implemented, to who's going to implement it, to make sure they have the capacity to manage the environmental risks.
Are you hoping that the deliberations at this Knowledge Week will influence at least part, in some small way, of the conversation at the forthcoming COP17 as world leaders gather in Durban to try to knock out a new program, to try to move us beyond Kyoto, all those kinds of things. Are you hoping to take a position there from business, from society?
Well, DBSA will not necessarily be representing ourselves as DBSA at COP because it's a country level discussion. But we are going to be there, we're going to have a stand, and we're definitely going to be showcasing what the bank has done to show people that there are things that can be done in different ways. We're going to be showcasing some of our projects. For example, we've got the Nivayas project, which is a very good example of biodiversity as ecostructure. We're going to be showcasing what other development finance institutions have done. We're working with the IDC on the green economy, and we'll be showcasing those projects. So, definitely. And
then at an entrepreneurship level, are we seeing innovation? I know that the focus right now when we talk alternative energy sources, we're looking at wind versus solar, and we're seeing industry coming to the fore for commercially viable projects. But are we seeing at a community level somebody saying, do you know what, I'm building my own house and I'm going to do it differently, and these are the sorts of things I'm doing that could eventually create a cottage industry on the side in some province or other?
Oh, definitely. We've got projects where we've got communities that are creating charcoal from clearing of alien invasives, which is very important because that would help your ecosystem. You're taking the aliens out of the ecosystem. You're helping the ecosystem function in a more sustainable manner. That same project, because they enable the biodiversity to return to the area, they've got more fynbos growing in the area. Now they can harvest the fynbos and sell the fynbos internationally and locally. So yes, there are different ways of doing things, and communities are definitely getting involved.
Okay, so we are doing something by way of the so-called adaptation and mitigation programs. Okay, Saphira Patel, thanks for your time. She's an environmental specialist at the Development Bank of Southern Africa.